If you're looking for long words, scientific theories, nuance, you'll find none of that here. Leadership isn't a science, it's a craft or a skill, and like any skill, with the right tuition, with hard work, with practice, it can be learned. We can all learn to lead brilliantly, and more than that, I fundamentally believe we all should learn to lead brilliantly. So these lessons are relevant to every leader, and not only are they relevant, they're intended to be things that you can take and start to implement right now. And most of all, leadership is about getting shit done. So if you're like me, you're time poor, impatient, and want to get on with it. So let's get started. So here are the 5 most important lessons I've learned about success, about failure, about leadership, and about life. So let's get into it. Lesson number 1, clarity and action. Leadership is difficult, but it is not complicated. So what is leadership? Well, by my definition, leadership is the navigation of a group of people from a defined start point in the present to a different and clearly defined state that exists in the future. What this means is that leadership is a doing word. And if there's a single thing you remember from this video and about leadership, it is that. All leadership is about change. It is about the conscious navigation of a team, whether that be a team of 5 people or 50,000 people, from a place you can clearly define in the present, today, to a different place you can clearly see and describe in the future. That is all leadership is. Leadership is not about the maintenance of the status quo. All leadership is about change and movement. And that, at its heart, is one of the key reasons why so many leaders fail. They don't think it is. They think it's a thinking word. Leadership does require thinking, but leadership is ultimately about doing. So if you only remember 2 words about leadership, it is these: clarity and action. And I'm one of those people that quite like maths, so I've put them into an equation. And this is my leadership equation. Leadership impact equals clarity multiplied by action. So what do I mean by clarity? Well, clarity is all the things that we usually think about and associate with leadership. There's a huge number of things you could include under clarity, but they might be defining your start point, defining your end point, your objectives, your strategy, your culture, your values, a whole load of important things that you need to describe and understand if you're going to be a leader. My fundamental point, however, is that those things, generally speaking, are not difficult to do. Very often, we're told that defining objectives, for example, needs to be a sign of our leadership virility. Therefore, we have to come up with something incredibly complicated to prove how clever we are. But if we come up with something complicated, very often we might not understand it ourselves, and certainly nobody else is going to understand it. And it isn't the point. The point is just describing in as clear terms as we possibly can where we are trying to get to. So that's clarity. Now, action speaks for itself. Action is a doing word. But the point of the equation is this: no matter how great your clarity, no matter how clear you are, no matter how great your strategy, if your action equals 0, you don't have to have done a degree in maths to solve the equation. Anything multiplied by 0 is 0. And this is the single most common reason for leadership failure. Leaders fail to act. And, we know why they fail to act, because action is difficult. They fail to act because they put decisions off. They hope that at some point in the future, everything will suddenly become magically clear. But it doesn't. That's not how the world works. And what leaders have to do is they have to reframe the thing they are most afraid of. They have to reframe their fear of error. Error is inevitable. And recognize that the surest route to failure is the failure to act. So remember, impact equals clarity multiplied by action. Clarity is important but not that difficult. Leaders fail because of lack of action. And don't just take my word for it. Even the godfather of strategy, Drucker, said ultimately all strategy devolves to action. Eventually, no matter how long leaders wait, if they're going to succeed, they have to get up from their desk and go and start doing. Number 2 is belief. I call these the 3 beliefs of leadership. And they are, number 1, spiritual. Do we all believe that what we are trying to achieve as an organization is a worthwhile endeavor? Number 2, intellectual belief. Do we all believe in our strategy or our plan to achieve that goal? And number 3, do I as an individual, and this applies to every individual in the organization, do I believe that I have the skills, the training, and the support to play my role? Now, I would suggest you pause right now and ask yourself, first and foremost, these 3 questions. Do you, as a leader or as an aspiring leader, have those 3 beliefs? Because if you're in charge and you don't, then I'm telling you now, nobody else is going to. And it is incredible how often you come across leaders at all levels in all types of organizations who themselves don't fundamentally believe. And by my definition, even if they believe, they just don't work hard enough to ensure everybody else in their team or their organization, first of all, understands, and second of all, believes. If you can imbue your team or your organization with those 3 beliefs, then you are gonna be a world beater. And that brings us to number 3, communication. Because communication is a key pillar for how you do that. So before we get to lesson 3, whether you're a leader or not, whether you're responsible for 5 people or 50,000 people, thanks very much for watching the video. And remember to hit like and subscribe, first of all, to get the message out there, to get the bullshit wiped away, and also for plenty more career-changing advice. I've come to believe that communication is one of the most important skills and tasks that all leaders need to have and need to do. Not only is it incredibly important, it's also basically very easy, and so many leaders at all levels, leaders all over the world, don't do it very well. And by don't do it very well, I'm not passing judgment on how great they are at oratory or how brilliant their writing is. I'm just saying they don't communicate enough and they don't do it clearly enough. When I first became a CEO, I took over a deeply broken business. And one of the things I wanted to make sure of was that everybody in the organization knew what it was we were trying to achieve. It wasn't particularly complicated what we were trying to achieve. It was difficult to do, but it wasn't complicated to understand. But nevertheless, I wanted to make unambiguously clear that people understood what our primary focuses were. And so every single company meeting that I ran, and I ran that company for over 5 years, I held up the same piece of polyboard with our 3 primary objectives on it. And I used that same piece of polyboard every meeting. So over the years, it became increasingly battered. It kind of became a joke. I still meet people now 15 years later who ask me if I've got that piece of polyboard. But let me tell you, every single person in that company was unambiguously clear what our primary objectives were. And the people that I bump into and ask me now, they still remember them too. And this is such an important task. And yet most leaders don't do it very well. And that's partly because leaders themselves kind of get bored of saying the same thing. They are often very clear in their own minds what it is they're trying to achieve. I mean, if you're not really, you're a pretty rubbish leader. But they're clear, but they feel like, oh, you know, I've said this to people so many times, I don't need to say it again. I feel like I need to tell them something new. I feel like I need to be entertaining to keep their attention. You really don't. You need to be relentlessly boring. And one of the things you need to recognize, particularly if you're the leader of a big team or a big organization, is that in reality, you play a very small part in the everyday lives of most of the people that work for you. You might never come into their brains at all. You send them one email every month to the whole company, or you run a company meeting every month. What is it as a percentage of their time? It's tiny. So you have to make sure that you're really cutting through. And if you're saying a different thing every time you talk to them, nobody's ever going to remember any of it. What you've got to do is keep saying the same thing. The other advantage with being relentlessly boring is it enables people to understand and put into context the other decisions you're taking. One of the key things for leaders is they need to take lots of decisions. Often people find change disconcerting and uncomfortable, and that's understandable. Many of us, if not all of us, do. One of the ways to help people feel more comfortable is to explain why, as a team or organization, you're doing the things you're doing. If everybody understands and knows that objective, it's so much easier for them to understand the decisions that you're taking and the changes that are happening within the organization, and even more importantly, to enable themselves to understand the role that they can play in that. So for many leaders, being an effective communicator is both the simplest and most effective change that they can make in terms of their leadership impact, in terms of their ability to achieve the outcomes they want. And the great news for leaders is you don't need to be able to speak like JFK or write like Hemingway. All you need to do is be honest, be consistent, and be authentic. And the reality of it is there's very few things in my experience that can't be shared with the whole organization. Leaders treat their teams and their organizations like children. You need to treat them like adults. They're ambitious people who want to have great careers, and they want you to help them achieve that. If they believe that you're good for their career, they're never gonna leave you. And so you need to treat them like adults. You need to tell them the good news, the bad news. You need to mark the milestones as you hit them. You need to say when problems arise. People understand that things don't always go the way you want them to go, but effective communication is actually a great way of reducing people's anxiety and stress, not least because they feel like you're an honest person who they can trust. So, communication. It requires very little talent, and you get a huge return from doing it well. Drinking from the fire hydrant. We all know how it feels. No matter what our job is, work expands to fill the time available. We always seem to have way more demands on our time than we can possibly cope with. And irrespective of your job, irrespective of the company you work in, I'd like you to imagine your day job as being like a graphic equalizer, like those desks with all the sliders on them that you see in recording studios. And imagine that every single task that you're faced with is one of those sliders. You've got 20, 50, 100 of them. Most leaders are very diligent, hardworking people, and what they try and do is they try and move all of those sliders forward. They try and tackle everything. And they get to the end of the year and they've worked hard and they've sweated blood and they think, God, we've managed to move every single one forward by 1%. But the problem is, of course, nobody notices 1%. You put all that time and effort and sweat in, and in reality, it doesn't feel to you or to anybody else, your boss or the people that work for you, or your customers, or your clients, nothing really feels like it's changed. And the truth is, nothing really has changed. The truth is, in any role, in any situation, if you try and do everything, you achieve nothing. And one of the greatest skills and most important tasks for leaders is to identify the areas where they are going to spend their time, and therefore where the company is going to spend the majority of its time. What are those tasks that are going to move you most rapidly towards your end objective? And back to the communication point, not only is it important that you understand what those tasks are, it's really important that the people that work for you, and indeed the whole company, are clear. What are the things that you have decided, or you and your leadership team have decided, you are going to prioritize and ideally be the best at? Now, that isn't necessarily that difficult to do. Many leaders perhaps do that. But now we come to problem 2. And problem 2 that many leaders have is they are quite diligent about identifying the real priority areas, but then they just carry on doing everything else anyway. And the real trick to prioritization is not picking the things that matter the most. It's important, but that's not that difficult to do. The real trick to prioritization is identifying what you're going to stop doing and having the courage to do it. One of the things that gets us promoted is our ability to keep lots of plates spinning. The more senior we become, however, we have to learn what we're going to stop doing, and we have to have the courage to do it. And I mean courage because very often in organizations, all of those tasks have got stakeholders attached to them. They've all got people saying to you that their thing is really important as well. But the truth is, they aren't all as important as each other. And as a leader, you've got to be very clear where you are going to spend your time, where your leadership are going to spend your time, and where the company is going to prioritize its efforts, and which areas you're going to deprioritize and stop. Obviously, you can't stop everything, but even a 20%, 10% shift in focus will, at the end of the year, make a huge and significant difference. Just imagine, back to the graphic equalizer, if rather than try and push all of the sliders forward by an equal amount, you took 1 or 2 and moved them right from the bottom to the top. We know from experience, everybody would notice the difference. And if you're a leader and people are noticing the impact you're making, you're doing most things right. Number 5 is failure. We love stories about failure. YouTube is full of people talking about the times they've failed and the things they've learned from it. And it's kind of exhilarating, you know, we like stories of redemption. But however entertaining they might be with hindsight, when it's happening to you in the moment, it can be really horrible. I know from my own personal experience, there was a 6-year period of my career where frankly, I did little else but fail. And it truly was the darkest, most horrible period of my career. Now, I can look at that time now and say most of what I learned about leadership started during those 6 years. But at the time, I didn't know that. At the time, I just thought I'd completely screwed my career. But if we aim to achieve anything worthwhile in life, whether we're a leader or whether we're learning to play a musical instrument, we have to accept that error and failure is inevitable. Nobody ever achieved anything worthwhile without getting stuff wrong along the way. And recently that's made me rethink how I view failure. I now don't just view failure as an occupational hazard. Yeah, of course, sometimes things might go wrong. I think failure plays a completely different role in ambitious leaders' lives. For ambitious leaders, failure is a prerequisite for success. If you're trying to achieve something really demanding, that's a real stretch, that you're really excited by, you're not going to get there without failing along the way. And I think that throws up a really interesting question. The really interesting question isn't, are we worried about failing? The interesting question is, are we failing enough? So I built my career on running change programs. And what I've learned through that time is that actually it is better to go too quickly, break too much stuff, and then if you have to put it back together, which sometimes you do, than it is to go too slowly. I remember the very first change program I ran, we were absolutely iconoclastic. We were determined to smash everything we could find that represented what the business had been. 80% of what we did was incredibly successful, but 20% of those decisions were disastrous. We were like, wow, we really needed that thing. But, you know, we just put it back together again. And the upsides of moving too quickly massively outweighed the downsides of moving too slowly. And that had the additional benefit. And that additional benefit was that it wasn't just okay for us as the leadership team to fail. We recognized that if we were going to succeed, to an extent, everybody had to, and has to, in your case, have license to fail. Because that's the only way we can move quickly enough, and ultimately it's the only way we can get the stuff that matters done. So we have to reframe failure. Failure isn't just an occupational hazard, it is a prerequisite for success. Failure's okay as long as you learn from it. For 6 years, I didn't learn. I kept making the same mistakes. I saw other people keep making the same mistakes. And one day I decided categorically that if we were going to get to where we wanted to get to as a business, we were going to have to make mistakes. But we were going to start making new mistakes. We were going to learn from the ones that we made, and we were going to be absolutely determined not to make that same mistake again. And that is the role that failure plays in your career success and your success as a leader. You have to get things wrong because that's how you learn. You have to make sure you learn from failure, and you have to say to yourself, I am determined not to make that same mistake again. For me, that has completely changed how I view failure and error. I still don't like getting things wrong. It's still horrible when it happens, but I'm not afraid of it. I don't allow it to stop me from taking action. And I am determined that I won't make the same mistakes more than once. Do I sometimes? Of course I do, because we're all human. But I don't fear it. And you have to liberate yourself from the fear of failure and accept that actually, if you use it in the right way, failure gets you there quicker. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you found these 5 lessons not just interesting, entertaining, but also incredibly useful. My intention is to give you stuff you can take and use right away. So if you enjoyed this, please hit like and subscribe to help us get the no bullshit message out there, and for plenty more career changing advice.